I'm Andrew, and I will be talking a bit about Malaysia's emerging economy. Malaysia's economy is doing very well and continues to show improvement. Unemployment is extremely low at 3.3%, which I'll talk more about later. And inflation is slowing, according to Focus Economics' review of Malaysia's economic outlook. Malaysia's had strong rising GDP, but does seem to be decelerating as it slowed from a 5.9% rise in 2017 to a 4.7% increase in 18 and has a projected increase of 4.6 for 2019. It also has a budget deficit of 3.1% of gross domestic product. They're currently seeing a slowdown in job growth, which comes at a time when they're attempting to encourage domestic growth. Another concern is the U.S.-China trade war, because the Malaysian economy is highly dependent on trade, and this can negatively impact their GDP. Malaysia is a free market. They have a current goal of running a balanced budget by the year 2020. In order to achieve this, the central bank creates monetary policy and works to limit Malaysia's risk by limiting exposure to certain financial instruments and promoting monetary and fiscal policy. They also seek to encourage competitiveness by liberalizing some services and sectors, creating tax reform, and reducing subsidies. The government is working to expand fiscal policy by initiating medium-term financial frameworks. These will give direction to the macroeconomy on a 3-year basis, and then they will review it at the end of those 3 years. As with any country, Malaysia has its share of fiscal challenges. There's currently no minimum wage, and regulations are poorly enforced. So going back to the 3.3% unemployment, this number doesn't necessarily mean as much as it would in the United States, because consumption may be limited by low wages. In fact, there's actually a strong presence of forced labor in some sectors. So there's a declining GNI, which may be reflective of this. Further contributing to that declining GNI may be school enrollment, which has been dwindling since 2013 and may be leading to greater unskilled workforce and growing income inequality. And on the topic of income inequality, it has doubled since 1988 to 2008. The Gini index is 41.0, which is very close to the United States, which is at 41.5. But where this is concerning is that the average wage in Malaysia is equivalent to about $477 per month, where the U.S. average income is roughly $4,900. So these low wages mixed with income inequality has been causing a lessening demand and consumer spending at a time when they're working to encourage domestic consumption in an attempt to shift away from dependence on trade, which we'll touch more on in a moment. Compounding the issue of income inequality is the lower productivity growth Malaysia has been experiencing. From 2016 to 2018, they showed productivity growth reduced by almost 50%. This has led to higher costs and lower profitability for businesses, which may make entrepreneurship less appealing. Additionally, this has raised the cost of living and poses further threats to GDP now and in the future. The Malaysian economy is heavily dependent on trade, which makes up 71.39% of GDP. Malaysia is one of the largest exporters, and it actually ranks 28 in country comparisons. They have several large trading partners, including Singapore, China, the US, Japan, Thailand, Hong Kong, South Korea, and Indonesia. They maintain a trade surplus of 22.5 billion, which is pretty great. But electronics make up 33.6% of that, followed by mineral fuels, machinery, fats, oils, and waxes, plastics, rubber, organic and other chemicals, and aluminum. But it's not all exports. Malaysia is also the world's 23rd largest importer, with integrated circuits making up roughly 1/5 of the $197 billion of total imports. Malaysia's official stance on fair trade is that they're committed to acceptable working conditions and fair labor. However, practice seems to tell a different story. As I mentioned, there's no minimum wage, and the average wage is about 1/10 of what we see in the US. But what's even more troubling is the prevalence of forced labor, primarily in the electronics industry. So, though wages may be livable and working conditions acceptable, extremely high employment and recruitment fees are placed on migrant workers, and their passports are often held until those fees, which often equal 1 year's compensation, are paid. So the employees have to pay roughly 1 year of their salary in these fees, and they're generally on 2-year terms. So they become stuck in a cycle of forced labor. This has led to 32% of roughly 200,000 migrant workers being subjected to forced labor. So while the poverty level is extremely low at 1%, or roughly 33.3 million people, this is questionable, as some believe that the poverty line should be 3 times higher than the official line. 60% live on less than $1,600 per month, with the average that I mentioned earlier at $477. A lot of this goes back to some things I mentioned before, such as lacking wage regulations, rising production costs, which may lead to pay cuts, and a majority of jobs being in low-paying, unskilled positions. So, some economic development shortfalls show a lack of disposable income in citizens poses a threat to future growth, especially when mixed with the rising cost of living. Further concerns lie in trade, with Malaysia being subject to large shifts in GDP in the face of rising trade tensions. So in examining Malaysian economy, I would recommend the creation of laws to limit employee recruitment fees and create minimum wage to combat forced labor and create a bit more domestic consumption in the process. I would also suggest creating programs to encourage education. In doing so, they not only bring up the wages of individuals, but also encourage innovation. If I were able to invest in the success of the Malaysian economy, I would push heavily toward investing in startups and entrepreneurship. I believe that entrepreneurship is the lifeblood of the economy after the consumer. This encourages competition, innovation, and it allows consumers to shop around, which may effectively be the same as increasing their income. Next, I would fund scholarships because I've personally seen the positive effects of education. But since my resources are limited and I can't invest in starting businesses in Malaysia, I can still be proactive here. I can do research and make deliberate purchases. The Bible tells us in Matthew 6:21, "For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." And in that same way, business follows the money. If unfair labor practices become unprofitable, then businesses will seek what is profitable. In conclusion, the economy is doing well, but of course issues remain. The government is attempting to tackle them with fiscal and monetary policy, but I believe the focus needs to be on education, fair labor standards, and entrepreneurship. Thank you.